Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, freaks and geeks, children of all ages. Welcome back to the Creepypasta Power Hour. Now, first off, I want to apologize if my audio is a bit different than usual. I usually record this after work when I'm, tired and exhausted, but this is actually before work. I've got the video pre-edited, just need to slot the audio in. Hopefully it works out that way, because it means I can go from recording to uploading faster. Let me know what you think of it in the comments down below, and hopefully soon I'll be able to get a better microphone. For those of you who aren't in the know, my microphone is a Logitech G432 gaming headset, which is why in a lot of my earlier videos you can hear the pa, and usually you can hear me smacking my lips. You can still hear that now from time to time, and I try to edit it out the best I can. But no more. I'm planning on buying a proper headset, so I'll let you guys know when I finally get that in the mail, and with that said, let's get into it. Remember a time before television was completely digital? It wasn't that long ago, but many people seem to have forgotten about the analog signals that were shared. To the outside viewer, one might not know the difference between the two. I probably wouldn't have known the difference myself if it wasn't for my parents' large antenna behind our house. It was the size of a car, and the space it required took a good quarter of our backyard. My dad loved television, and his job allowed him to afford whatever expense for his addiction. I remember there was a TV in every room of the house, even the bathroom. Based, by the way, my great-grandpa did the same thing. My room was no exception. The TV was an older television cabinet, one of those with the TV built inside and had its fake drawers. It was originally our living room set, but since our dad upgraded to a 42-inch CRT, I inherited it. I guess he was tired of kicking me out of the living room when I was playing video games. Ironically, I never was much into TV myself. It was never interactive enough for my tastes, and I hated someone just telling me a story. Usually the TV in my room would be on Channel 4 for my Nintendo. On rare occasions I would turn on to Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon when I was particularly bored with jumping on enemies, but that was about it. I was still appreciative of the set, however. I recall there were about 120 channels on the dial of my TV. Because of the placement of the channels, it was easier to go backward to get to the channels that I would watch rather than going forward. However, in this way, there was a lot of what I called ghost channels. They were mostly shows that didn't come in quite right. I'm not exactly sure why they were there. Maybe the signal wasn't strong enough, or maybe it had something to do with how it was connected to the antenna. Most of them were just static, where you could barely hear any talking, but I could never quite make out what they were saying. Almost every channel from 80 to 120 were ghost channels. I started getting actual programming around channel 80 or so, but Nickelodeon was 78, Cartoon Network not so far behind. Looking back, turning the channel this way saved at most a couple of minutes of my life, but it made me feel efficient as a child, even if I had to hear annoying static. But one of the stranger ones I called Channel 1. The dial on the television didn't have a 1 labeled. I've been told on some TVs this was the U channel, but I guess it functioned the same. It went from 2 right to 120, however there was one definite audible click between them. The channel was always in complete static. The other ghost channels would have actual channels trying to push through. This one wasn't a ghost channel, it was dead. No sounds of talking, no pictures forming, nothing like the others, just complete static. None of the other televisions in the house had a channel 1. For some strange reason, I always felt bad for the channel. It seemed like it was forgotten. I'm not sure why I had such strange empathy for the TV channel, but I always slowed down as I got closer to it just to acknowledge it was there. I guess I called it a dead channel, but that was wrong of me. Rarely there would be something on the channel. I remember the very first time it happened. It was summer and I was on vacation from school. I was watching Nickelodeon until Nick at Night came on. I didn't really watch the grandma shows, as I not so affectionately refer to the black and white syndication that ran on the channel after dark. I was bored and not ready to sleep, so I started changing the channel back to Super Mario Bros. 2. I was going past the channels when I noticed an old black and white program flicker right before I reached channel 4. As I said, there would be times the ghost channels would have something on them. but never have I seen something in monochrome, and most definitely never on channel 1. I could have sworn that's where I seen it, so I slowly turned the dial back bit by bit until I got to the empty space, and sure enough, something was there. I don't remember any of the exact details at the time. I was fairly young and a bit confused, and my grasp on all the grown-up language was pretty limited. I remember an older man in a black suit and tie reading a sheet of paper, speaking into a microphone with a fairly bland background. His voice seemed distinguished and educated. At first glance, it was obvious he was a newscaster, but the thing is, he didn't make any sense to me at the time. I vaguely remember he was talking about something with World War II, I think. It was about the Pearl Harbor attack and evacuations of civilians in the area that might be future targets. It was fairly serious sounding. I recall being fascinated and confused. About 2 minutes in, the signal faded back to empty static. Thinking about it now, I would have been really creeped out if this happened, but my childlike wonder left me intrigued. It seemed fairly normal to me since old shows ran all the time. I figured why not the news as well? I figured the channel 1 was just an old news station that rarely ever came on. However, because of this rare occasion, I became fascinated with channel 1. Wanted to see what else would pop up. I sat there watching the static for an hour, but nothing happened. Disappointed and lulled into sleep with the white noise, I went to bed defeated. However, that moment made me obsessed with seeing something on this secret channel. I felt like I'd seen something that I wasn't supposed to, or something that no one else had seen before. It was as if Channel 1 acknowledged my existence in return. When I was bored and didn't feel like playing video games, I would turn on the TV onto Channel 1 just to see if anything else would force its way through the deck static. It drove my parents crazy having to listen to that harsh white noise most of the time. It eventually drove them to the point that they would demand that I either change the channel or turn it off, threatening to take the TV away if I didn't. Humorously, I remember getting the talk from my father because he thought I stumbled upon a scrambled porn channel, only to find out that wasn't the case. But they never believed me when I told them, saying that Channel 1 didn't exist, but despite these threats I intently watched. Most of the time, with the sound turned down enough that I could hear it, their reprimands inspired me. Them telling me not to watch it, even denying the existence, only made my curiosity worse. I watched it for weeks over that summer. Most of the time, it would be nothing, but eventually my efforts pay off. I recall 4 more incidents of something coming up on Channel 1 after that day. I remember seeing that strange newscast. These events were a week or 2 apart, at completely random times of the day. Each of these only lasted for a minute or 2 before they faded away. The first one I saw was a cartoon of all things. Through the faint static, there was an image of a sun breathing fire on the land, causing the water to dry up and the plants to die in a cartoonish way. There was no voice acting, only a narrator that talked over the show. I could barely hear him through the static. From what I could tell, there was a Native American village that was dying from the heat of the sun as a Native American boy tried giving animals water, but all that was left was a drop. Before the plot could develop any further, the whole thing faded into static. The second time was the newsman again. This time he was talking about a rather terrible story of a young girl who was murdered in a park somewhere in California. He made brief mention of the scene, of how her body was discovered in 2 locations, though the details were intentionally vague. He made mention of a police investigation not turning up much, and he demanded that if anyone knew anything about this, contact the authorities. I remember he said something about it being a Black Daisy murder or something to that effect before the scene faded into static. The third one was like an old weather report. I remember seeing someone other than the newscaster talking about how cold weather was great for the season. He mentioned the low temperatures and snow falling. It was a very stark contrast to the humid summer that I was dealing with. Honestly, don't remember much of this because I believe it came on at 3 a.m. I only caught it because it woke me up out of a dream. It was Doctor Who and the Sensorities. The last broadcast I caught, though, was rather disturbing, different from anything else I had ever seen. Before then, everything I had seen was at least recognizable, but what came across the last time was too frightening for my young mind. It was some older man in a nice outfit, in a monocle looking at a thing in his hand. I distinctly remember he spoke with a thick accent of some kind. However, the static distorted his features where I could not see his face. But what was wrong were the creatures he was talking about. They had distorted skulls, long faces, slits for eyes. I don't remember seeing noses or mouths, but their skin was leathery and dark. I figured they were aliens of some sort, but not having any exposure to sci-fi, they looked like burn victims. The static was just thick enough I could not make out any details to relieve the stress of my mind. As a child, this vision scared me, so much that I remember leaping out of bed, turning out the TV as quick as I could. I ran into my parents' bedroom crying, trying to explain what I saw, but they didn't believe anything about Channel 1. They played it off as if it was just static and my eyes were playing tricks on me before berating me about watching Channel 1 again. Since then, I had always gone the long way around the dial, made damn well sure that I stayed away from Channel 1 as much as possible. Fortunately, I didn't use that TV much longer. I had gotten a new TV for Christmas that year, as well as a Super Nintendo. Undoubtedly, they bought this to alleviate the issues I had with Channel 1. This TV didn't have ghost channels and not even a way to access Channel 1. However, the old TV was in my room due to it being fairly useful as a desk to put the new TV on top of. Besides, the TV cabinet was roughly 600 pounds and my parents had no desire to drag it out of my room. For a long time, the TV just went unused and the channel was completely out of my mind at this point. It wasn't until 15 years later that old TV would be used again. I had inherited my dad's flat-screen TV from his room after he got yet another upgrade. It was nice, but it only had composite cables, no plugs for an RF adapter. By this time, analog on televisions was phased out for digital, so there was way less need for those coaxial cables. It didn't bother me much because every other console I had supported it, but my old Nintendo, I knew there was a composite cable option, but I never bothered investing in it. But one day I had this urge to play Super Mario Bros. 2 again, so I just plugged into the TV cabinet and plugged in the Nintendo. It was simple. The old Nintendo RF adapter as well as the antenna cable were already in the back. I had no desire to move the heavy TV to unplug it after all these years of using it as a desk. However, since my dad had moved on to digital cable, the only channels that were coming in were the analog ones. The huge antenna in our back was still functional, so the quality of the signals was fairly good. Curiosity consumed me as I browsed the channels to see what we were still getting. After clicking through more than 100 dead channels, there was only one I needed to check. It was a good long time before I had even considered looking at it again, and I vaguely remembered the creepiness of it, but now I just dismissed it as childlike imagination as I was told it was. I turned to Channel 1. On first glance, it was nothing but static, but there was something different in the static than it was all the other dead channels. It was harsh, almost scrambled. There was strange, constant sound coming through. It's hard to explain, but it sounded like someone was talking underwater. Every couple of seconds, a high-pitched sound would come in and slowly fade, like the sound of your ears when they were ringing. I intently watched for a good minute, trying to make out what was going on. I could see the video ever so faintly through the static. In my mind's eye, it was the reporter with the paper and microphone I'd seen long before. I was humored at the luck of stumbling upon something on the channel again after all these years. As I said, it was 15 years and I didn't even look at it all that time. I remember spending weeks worth of time on the random 2 minutes of content. Quite literally a 1 in a million odds. The signal grew stronger and it became easier to make out, and eventually I was treated to a fuzzy picture show. However, as the picture started coming through, a sense of dread washed over me. It looked like the reporter, but something was deformed with his face. It looked disproportionate. His head was large, I'd say roughly 1.5 times the size of a normal human, making it very easy to see details despite all the static. It had a shiny rubber texture to it, and it was expressionless. His lips barely moved, and the sockets seemed dark and empty. It was as if he was wearing a cartoon mask of himself. I was confused at first, but then the whole face changed, this time looking angry, the mouth seeming to grit non-existent teeth, and the brow furrowed with a scowl. The mouth grew wide like a snake unhinging his jaw, then slammed shut. His face completely neutral again. It seemed wrong. It wasn't quite a mask or a puppet. It was like someone was wearing skin that didn't fit. His movements were exaggerated, his head bobbing up and down repeatedly as he talked. It wasn't any sort of rhythm or motion, but completely sporadic. His hands were moving the papers in exaggerated motions as he flipped through them. On the papers, it was complete scribbles ran haphazardly across the page. It seemed as if someone was imitating a caricature of the reporter, like a parody or a satire. As he spoke, the strange reverse glubbing and the harsh static came through. A screech that sounded like a roar of a robotic elephant came piercing through the static that caused me to freeze in fear. It was then I noticed the other proportions. His hands were dangling, the skin was hanging off the bone and had no real muscle structure to it. bending and folding nearly flat at some points, his pinky not moving at all, dangling loosely. 2 fingers, the index and the thumb, were longer by a good inch. His limbs seemed unusually long, his forearms disappearing into the desk and his arms sloping all the way down. Even his body frame was disturbing, resembling long, nearly rail-thin proportions. He looked at the camera and you could see the strange-looking eyes just gazing right at you beneath the mask's dead eyes. Then I realized that it wasn't entirely black and white. I could see cyan-colored orbs behind the slits, like the whole studio was washed from color rather than the broadcasted in monochrome. His head suddenly twitched and shook violently, then the static overtook the image. I was enthralled but frightened. My hand was still on the dial, frozen. I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing, what was actually happening. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just seeing things through the static. I remember exhaling violently as I had forgotten to take a breath the entire time that was going on. My mind tried to reason with itself. Maybe I just witnessed something and took it out of context, like I caught the end of a late-night Saturday Night Live skit. Hell, maybe I just imagined the entire thing. Just as I started to calm down and change the channel, I heard a voice that had been lost to my memory. It was the reporter. There was no image available, just static, and the voice was faint, barely intelligible from the noise. I had turned the volume up full blast just to make out what he was saying, for some reason feeling like he could explain what I just saw. His words were broken, with at least a second's worth of pause between them, and the tone from one word did not match the next, as if someone was using a soundboard. Even after a decade later, after I heard it, I remember it clearly as yesterday. Good morning, danger, killing, everyone, Earth, time, 2029. Everyone evacuate, 2029. All dead, good night. There was a loud screeching roar, followed by complete sound garbage, painful, ear-piercing gibberish, probably because I had the TV on full blast. If you hear the faint speech, then the signal cut out completely. Normally there was a small fade to static, but this was an immediate feed cut. A feeling of nausea and worry overcame me, and I felt my tongue pull back into my throat. I had trouble comprehending what I just saw, my mind racing miles per second. I had gripped the dial so hard I shattered the plastic casing underneath my fingers and didn't realize I was bleeding. I had let Channel 1 stay on for over an hour with the loud static just to see if I could hear anything else, but nothing came up. I left it on for days, weeks, months. I bought a DVD recorder to record it when I slept and while I was at work. For almost a year of my life, I'd spent hours with both televisions on, one watching what I missed and one watching what might yet be. I dreamed in static. I had nightmares of these horrible, disfigured, proportioned doppelgangers of the newscaster. My entire life was consumed by the television. I was hoping, begging to hear anything. But despite my efforts, that was the last I heard anything from Channel 1. My parents, which I was living with at the time, became so concerned they forced me to see a psychiatrist to explain it to me. He said I had some sort of psychotic episode from stress, that my mind had made up the whole event. Not once did he reassure me what I might have seen could actually happen. He told me to quit watching Channel 1, but I refused. He tried to put me on medication, but I refused. He eventually ordered me to take the TVs out of my room, telling my parents that I shouldn't be allowed to watch the TV unsupervised. Again, I refused. It wasn't until my father eventually smashed the old TV and burned it while I was at therapy that my search was forced to stop. I'd spent time looking at what might have been, searching forums, doing research, anything I could. The most common explanation I got was that some old TV waves were sent out in space. Sometimes they came back, bouncing off planet. That might have explained why I might have had those old news reports, but I never got a good explanation for what I saw that day. My mind tries to wrap around the possibilities, but I never found the answers, other than people who seem crazier than I. I've been told that it was aliens warning us about some asteroid coming to Earth, with the government trying to cover it up. Some told me my TV was possessed by a demonic spirit offering me a prophetic vision. Some told me it was a message from the future, appearing from a wormhole. And many told me that I was lying, or that I was crazy, or that it was some story I wrote just to get some attention and scare people. I'm not sure what I saw. I just know I've seen something that maybe I shouldn't have seen but did. Or maybe it was something that was meant for us to see, but many just neglected. The unlabeled channel. A channel that was completely removed from most TVs after that. I believe Channel 1 was trying to communicate something with me. Every now and then I desperately want to see what's on Channel 1, to hear any messages that might have been left out there, like some twisted obsession, but now analog TVs are a thing of the past. I couldn't replicate the same setup anymore, at least not without hundreds of thousands of dollars. It might be impossible now. I just want to know if there are any messages out there meant for us, things we might have missed. Thousands of minutes of my life go by, each containing one possible message, a warning that I might have missed, a narrative that I needed to hear. I wonder if the change to digital was with the best intentions, or was it because it had better quality picture and less frequency pollution? Maybe something was seeing us, seeing our society filled with violence, murder, killing our planet, seeing our fingerprint passing through empty space only for something to pick it up light years away. Or maybe the change was to prevent us from seeing what they were sending back. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Channel 1. Frankly, it was amazing. It's not very cliche, it's just really well written. The horror isn't obvious either, it just leaves you with questions and no answers. Like, why did it look like the reporter was wearing a mask? Why did it look like, not even a mask, it looked like it was flesh too big for his body, which is a really interesting descriptor. This one doesn't give you too much horror, but it doesn't give you too many answers, and it leaves a lot of questions on the table. It's really fun to think about because it's like, it doesn't horrify me, but there's so many questions. Like, okay, well, let's say he was receiving old television waves from outer space. Okay, well, why did he manage to get it right at that time of day, right when he turned on Channel 1, right when he saw the message he needed to see? I love it, and I love that it sounds like a warning to me, honestly. I don't know how else to describe it. Maybe I should have scripted out my thoughts, but it sounds like a warning that on 2029 Earth time, we will need to evacuate the planet because, well, who knows? Maybe it's an invasion, maybe there's an asteroid coming, maybe the sun will expand way sooner than we thought it would and it will kill us all. Any number of possibilities could be conveyed through that, but we don't know. It cuts to dark. The false newsman is no more, and it eats away at our author. I don't know, it's just fascinating. I think about it a lot. I really like this story. And I hope you liked it too, and if you didn't, leave your thoughts down below. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. Sorry this video is a lot more unscripted. Maybe it sounds like I'm rushing through it. I know in the earlier parts, I recorded this in 2 chunks, so the first half was recorded in the morning, the second half, when you could tell I was going super fast, was recorded a bit ago. But yeah, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, freaks and geeks alike, children of all ages, I hope you enjoyed it, and I've got some special videos in the future. They're in the works right now, and I hope you enjoy them when it comes out. Take care, and good night.